Hello and welcome to the Ellen Maid Book Club and my first check-in on the Diversity Book Bingo 2026. If you're not familiar, the Diversity Book Bingo is a reading challenge that I am hosting for the second year. The first one was in 2025 and I did a bingo board with 25 squares and then prompts for continents and diversity representation. This year I have expanded it a little bit, so there are different versions of the challenge that you can choose from. I will leave a link to the announcement video in the cards and the description so you can watch that to learn more. But basically there are different challenge setups, so you can choose to read for 6 prompts, 12 prompts, 25 prompts, or 36 prompts. The ones with 25 and 36 prompts have bingo boards with them, and you can do this a lot of different ways. The main point of the challenge is to read books from all 6 continents and with all kinds of diversity representation that are listed in this challenge, and then you put that book that you read somewhere on the bingo board where it fits a prompt. If you find that a bit confusing, hopefully this update will help you get a grasp of how it works and also get some recommendations for books you could read, and also check out the announcement video where I hopefully explain things a bit more clearly. I will also say that some of the books that I'm going to mention in this video might be swapped out as the year goes on. If I find a book that I think fits the prompt better or has more representation or like is on a continent that I haven't read as much from, or something like that, I might change some of these basically, but this is where we're at for now. So on the top row I have completed the prompt Unreal, and that prompt is just to read a book with an unreal story, like a fantasy or science fiction or horror story, or just with something unreal in the title or something unreal on the cover. I chose to go with a young adult fantasy novel. This is The Maid and the Crocodile by Ifueko. I am counting it for disability representation because the main character has an unlucky foot, as she calls it. She has an injured foot and she uses a cane. And I'm also counting it for LGBTQ representation because there is some queer rep in the story and the author is also part of that community. I really enjoyed this one, and I'm going to put my star rating in the corner so you can see that as we go through the books. I have also read a couple of biographies that I could count for the prompt memoir or biography on the top row. I read The Feather Detective by Sweeney, which was fascinating, and also Rebel of the Regency by Anne Foster. So I could count both of those, but they don't provide me with a lot of diversity. They're set in, the US and in the UK, and so I have them sort of penciled in and I can use them if I need them, but I would prefer to find a memoir or biography that gives me some more diversity for this particular challenge. My next prompt that I have completed is on the second row, and that is debut, which is simply to read a debut book, an author's first published work. And for this one I counted We Don't Talk About Carol by Kristen L. Berry, a dual timeline contemporary and historical fiction, and this is set in North America, but it deals with Black history and is written by a Black author. So I'm also counting it for minority. At the other end of the row we have the prompt personal goal, and that can be anything. It can be a reading goal. Maybe you want to complete series this year, or read more nonfiction, or read more classics, or it can be that you have a personal goal to learn something. Maybe you want to get better at finances or math or something, or learn a language, and maybe you are wanting to read a book in another language than your own, or maybe you have a goal to clean your house more often while you're listening to an audiobook, and then you listen to a book while you're doing that. And so that's, anything that gets you closer to a personal goal can count for this prompt. I made a video about my reading goals for the year, and one of them is to read a selected few books, and on that list we have James by Percival Everett, and now I have read this book, and so that counts for this prompt to work toward a personal goal. This is historical fiction. It's a companion novel, I would say, to Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And I'm counting this for the continent of North America, and I'm also counting it for minority, since it is about African Americans, and I'm also counting it for the prompt religion, because religion is a pretty prominent part of the story, and like the discussions about religion here I think are prevalent enough to count it for this prompt. On the third row we have the prompt climate or nature, and this can be to read any book that is about climate or nature or animals or something within the natural world or relating to the environment, climate change, all those kinds of things. I went with Unbowed by Wangari Maathai for this prompt. Wangari Maathai was a Kenyan activist who ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize, and she started out and sort of mainly throughout her life worked with the Green Belt movement, planting trees in Kenya and the surrounding area. So that was very much to do with the environment and nature, not necessarily because of climate change, but because of colonialism and Europeans coming to Africa to use the natural resources there. And they cut down all the trees and put plantations there instead to make money, which obviously affected the natural landscape a lot. So Maathai was an activist to try to combat that and lots of other things. It counts for the continent of Africa, and I'm also counting it for indigenous people, since Wangari Maathai is from one of the indigenous tribes in Kenya. And I'm also counting it for the prompt religion. Religion is an important part of the story as well, both for Wangari Maathai personally and also like within the politics and the development of the country and like things that happen and her journey to become the activist that she was. Highly recommend this one. The next prompt on this row is comfort read, and that can be anything that is a comfort read to you. I decided to go with The Morning Necklace by Kate Foster. I hadn't read this before, but I have read from this author before, and this very much fits the same vibe as the first book that I read by her, which is The Maid. It's historical fiction centering women's experiences in Scotland. This one is set in the 1700s. Yeah, I just really like her writing style and the atmosphere and the topics that she discusses, and so this is not a feel-good novel by any means, but it was a comfort read for me because I sort of knew what to expect, and I knew that I would enjoy it, and I did. This counts for the continent of Europe, but no other diversity representation, which is fine. Like, not every book that you put on the bingo board has to have specific types of representation, as long as the book fits the prompt on the bingo board, and as long as you somehow fill out all of the diversity and continent prompts with other books. On the fourth row, we have the prompt backlist, and that is to read any book that isn't an author's latest release. I might change this, we'll see, but for now I am going with Assembly by Natasha Brown. She has since published Universality, and so it is a backlist book, and it's one that I had been wanting to read for a long time, and now I finally did, and I loved it. This is about a Black woman in Britain, so it counts for the continent of Europe and also minority. And then the next prompt on this row is Buzzword, and that is to read any book that fits any of the prompts on the Buzzword challenges by Kayla at Books and Lala. And I decided to go with a prompt on the title challenge, which is to read a book with a keyboard key in the title. For me, that was The Midnight Shift by Cheon Seonran, which has the word shift in it, which is the keyboard key. And so that fits a Buzzword prompt, and so that fits a diversity book bingo prompt. This is set in Korea, and it's by a Korean author. It's a translated novel, translated by Jean Peng. So it counts for the continent of Asia, and then it also has a lot of queer representation, so it also counts for the LGBTQIA+ prompt. And then I've also completed the 5-star read prompt on this row with On Earth as It Is Beneath by Anna Paula Maya, and this is translated by Padma Viswanathan. I'm not sure how to say that name, but we're going with that. This is a Brazilian author, and this story is sort of a thriller horror book, which I haven't talked about in a wrap-up or anything yet, but I will in my April wrap-up. This was 5 stars for me, so it counts for this prompt. It also counts for the continent of South America, since it is set in Brazil and written by a Brazilian author. And then on the 5th row, we have a prompt that is lock and key, and that is to read a book with a lock and or a key on the cover or in the title, in the author's name. You know, there are lots of different ways to interpret this prompt, and you can, you know, be as creative as you want with it. I read My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney for this prompt, but that was when I thought that she was a person of color, and she's not. So this is one of the books that I might switch out later, but like I have a backup at least. For the next prompt, which is quick and easy, which is just to read a book that is quick and or easy. It can be a short book or a lighthearted book or a book that was easy or quick to read for whatever reason. I have a couple of options here. One of them is Squire by Nadia Shammas and Sarah Al-Faqih, and this is a young adult graphic novel, fantasy graphic novel with queer representation and disability representation, and the authors are Palestinian American and Jordanian American, I think. My other option is Cinder House by Freya Marsk, which is written by an Australian author, and I don't have any other Australian authors on my bingo board yet, so that would be good. But, you know, it is a Cinderella retelling, so it's not set in Australia. It's a fantasy / I don't know, horror book. It's not very scary, but yeah, it's not set in Australia, but it does have queer representation. Either one of those could work, depending on like what other books I end up counting for this challenge. I might choose one of them or something completely different. You know, quick or easy is a pretty easy prompt to find books for, so we'll see where I end up on that. And then on the final row, we have a prompt that is to read a book with a cover you love, and I typically go for the more colorful ones, but I ended up going with Confessions by Kanai Minato, which is translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder, and I do love this cover. I think it fits the vibe of the book very well. This is about a teacher who finds out that her students are responsible for the death of her daughter, and she has some consequences in mind for that. And so this novel is very tense, and I think the cover fits that vibe very well, and so I do love this cover for that reason. I think it's very ominous and dark, and it just makes you ask lots of questions, like who's sitting in the middle chair, and you know, what's going on. And this counts for the continent of Asia, since it is set in Japan and written by a Japanese author. That's all I counted it for. I think so. The next prompt on this row is migration, and for that I'm counting A Guardian and a Thief by Megha Majumdar. This is about a family in India who are trying to migrate to the United States, and their migration documents are stolen 1 week before their flight leaves, and so they have to figure that out. This also counts for the continent of Asia. And then the final prompt that I have completed so far is nonfiction, and for that I read Rare Tongues by Lorna Gibb, which is about languages that are losing their speakers or have lost their speakers for different reasons. It looks at languages in that situation all over the world. The author is from the UK, from Scotland, I think, and she does talk about her own language as well. And there are lots of different languages and groups of people that this book is talking about. So I'm counting it for the continent of Europe, since the author is European, and it also deals with languages in Europe, but I'm also counting it for indigenous people, because in a lot of cases the languages that are threatened are languages of indigenous people and minority groups. So even though this book is written from a Western perspective. It does look at lots of different languages in lots of different places of the world, and that I think makes it a good fit for this challenge. And again, every book doesn't have to provide a lot of like diversity representation, but I do appreciate the fact that this book, you know, covers something on all continents. As far as I can remember, that fits very well with this challenge. I have definitely finished at least 9 prompts, which is like my goal for the first quarter. Since there are 36 prompts, I need to read 3 books on average for this challenge per month. I am on track, and I think I'm a little bit ahead even, and then we'll see if I decide to switch some books out later. If you have read anything for the challenge so far this year that you would like to share, please do so in the comments. Or if you have a prompt that you're struggling with, or like a continent that you're finding it difficult to find books for, you can ask in the comments as well. And I will also leave links to the Storygraph challenge in the description box, because on there you can find lots of books. I think there are 1,700 books saved on there for the different prompts, and like, you know, they're under the different continents and diversity representations and things. So yeah, you can find lots of inspiration there. There's also a Discord server that you're welcome to join if you want. I keep forgetting to mention that, but yeah, I will leave a link to that in the description as well. I think that's always linked in the description of my videos. You're very welcome to join and have a chat about what you're reading and what you're wanting recommendations for, and we'll help each other out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one.